Hey folks, get comfy, because today we're heading so far back in time that even your grandma's antique china looks brand new by comparison. We're talking about the Sumerians, some of the very first people who didn't just build a city, but managed to create an entire universe of legends, gods, and myths. You've probably heard the name Sumer before, but let's be honest, most of us know it the way we know that one neighbor's dog. We hear the bark, but have no idea what's going on behind the fence. Well, today's the day we figure it out. In this episode, you'll learn why the Sumerians thought humans were basically created to do all the hard work for the gods. Yep, corporate culture has been around way longer than we thought. How their myths traveled over to Babylon and then slipped into the Bible. And of course, we'll dive into the story of the Anunnaki, those mysterious beings that some say were just gods, while others are convinced they were ancient aliens. So, were they storytellers with a wild imagination, or the first sci-fi writers in history? Well, try to get to the bottom of it. So grab a mug of tea, wrap yourself in a blanket, and let's take a stroll through a few thousand years of history.
And hey, while you're getting comfortable, take a second to hit that like button. And subscribe if you're into what I'm doing here. Drop a comment too. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your clock. I love knowing who's joining this little nighttime adventure.
All right then, lights down low, blanket tucked in. Let's begin. Now let's get to know the real stars of our story, the Sumerians. Picture this. Way back in the 3rd millennium BC, when most of humanity was still figuring out the basics of small village life, the Sumerians were already playing city builder on expert mode. They settled between the Tigris and Euphrates, not just a pretty spot, but prime real estate. The soil there was so rich that even a modern-day farmer would probably shed a jealous tear. Thanks to that land, they could grow tons of grain, build massive settlements, and eventually create the world's first true city-states, places like Ur, Uruk, and Lagash. Each city came with its own ruler, its own army, its own laws, and even its own personal patron god. At the center of it all stood the ziggurat, a giant multi-level temple where priests handled rituals and sacrifices. Think of it this way. If today the heart of a city is a giant shopping mall with a food court, back then it was a temple that doubled as a cosmic hotline to the gods. Where the Sumerians themselves came from? Still a mystery. Their language doesn't match anything else we know. Like they landed here from some linguistic alien planet. Maybe they were native to Mesopotamia. Maybe they migrated from somewhere far away. Historians are still scratching their heads. But one thing's clear. These folks were innovators. They came up with cuneiform writing on clay tablets using a reed stylus, then leaving them out to dry or baking them in kilns. Those little slabs were basically the world's first USB drives. And thanks to them, we know not only about their myths and laws, but also their tax records. Yup, the Sumerians were the first to invent accounting, taxes, and a financial system. They also gave us the wheel, irrigation systems, and the sexagesimal way of counting time. So the next time you glance at your watch and see 60 minutes, you can thank the Sumerians for that.
But their biggest legacy? Mythology. For the Sumerians, gods weren't just imaginary characters. They were the CEOs of the universe, making all the big calls. And they didn't create people out of kindness. They created us to do their work for them. Sounds familiar, right? Like signing a never-ending labor contract with 0 vacation days.
Even after Sumer declined, their ideas lived on. The Babylonians and Assyrians adopted Sumerian gods and gave them upgrades. A simple storm god became the fearsome Ashur, basically the Assyrian war manager. The Babylonians put Marduk on top of the Pantheon, turning him into the supreme creator god. And the echoes of Sumerian myths made their way into the Bible, too. The story of the Great Flood in Genesis? Pretty much a remix of the Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, the man who survived by building an ark. In Babylon, he was called Utnapishtim. In the Bible, Noah. Different names, same plot. Even early ideas about the afterlife in Israel sound a lot like the Sumerian Underworld, a gloomy, dusty shadowland where souls drift in darkness. And some biblical heroes might have Sumerian DNA in their legends. The mighty hunter Nimrod, for example, could be a literary echo of Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, who fought the gods and went chasing immortality. Which means even in Holy Scripture, the whispers of Sumer are still alive.
All right, listen up. The reason we even know about Sumerian myths isn't because somebody's grandma passed them down with a once-upon-a-time rumor. Nope, it's thanks to a full-on tech revolution of the ancient world, the invention of cuneiform writing. Think of it as their version of a flash drive, only made of clay, and definitely not waterproof. Picture this. Instead of Google Docs, they had fresh clay tablets. Instead of a keyboard, they used a sharpened reed. You press down, leave a mark, boom, text ready. And to make sure it didn't just smear away, they'd either dry the tablet in the sun or bake it in a kiln. Honestly, it sounds more like a cooking recipe than writing. Step 1, prep the dough. Step 2, stick it in the oven. Only instead of pizza, you got an eternal archive. And that's how Sumerian myths managed to survive for thousands of years. These weren't just random doodles either. They wrote down religious texts, laws,
business records, basically the ultimate all-inclusive package of ancient knowledge. And since the Babylonians and Assyrians copied a lot of these texts, the stories stuck around long enough to make it to us.
One of the biggest data centers of the ancient world was the Library of Ashurbanipal. Imagine the Library of Alexandria, but on a budget, and fireproof since clay doesn't burn. Archaeologists digging through its ruins found a massive stash of cuneiform tablets, many of them retelling Sumerian legends in Babylonian style. The most famous of these is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tale of Uruk's king, who, like the hero of some ancient adventure series, goes questing for immortality, runs into gods, fights monsters, and even hears the story of a great flood. This wasn't just a poem. It's the oldest surviving piece of literature we've got. Basically, the Bronze Age's blockbuster hit. Call it the Netflix original of 2000 BC, minus the subscription fees and annoying ads. So next time you're staring at your old college notes, thinking no one will ever care, just remember the Sumerians. Their notebooks outlived empires, wars, and entire civilizations. And here we are, still reading them today.
For the Sumerians, the universe didn't just pop into being with a snap of the fingers. No, boom, let there be light, like in later religions. Nope, their version was way more dramatic. Think of it less like divine magic and more like a messy apartment renovation. First comes the dust, chaos, and piles of junk, with that sinking feeling of, how can anyone live like this? But somewhere in that mess, potential is hiding.
Picture it. An endless ocean of fresh water, dark and cold, with no shape or color. This was Abzu. Not just a giant pool, but a living, breathing force of chaos. Beneath the earth lurked Nun, the hidden underground waters, invisible even to the gods. In that shadowy void, nothing had taken form yet, but the spark of creation was already there, waiting.
From this chaos, the first gods began to appear, not by design, not on a schedule, but like sparks flying from a fire. On the sky, Ki, the earth. At first, they were tangled together, one big knot of chaos. But for a real world to exist, something had to change. You can't exactly build a planet if Earth keeps sticking to the sky like melted cheese on cheap pizza. Enter Ninhursag, goddess of the mountains, and basically the first urban planner. She shaped the hills, separated land from water, carved out riverbeds. In other words, she did the rough groundwork so life could eventually move in. To the Sumerians, creation wasn't magic, it was craft. Slow, muddy, back-breaking work
with the gods knee-deep in clay, molding reality until it was ready for tenants. But the real drama hadn't even started yet. An and Ki were still fused together, so their son, Enlil, god of wind and storms, had enough of it. He tore the two apart, sky up high, earth pressed down below. And just like that, space was born. Think of it as the Sumerian version of separating light from darkness, except way more aggressive. Like a teenager slamming the door, Enlil created the world we live in. Of course, that wasn't the end of the story. The world was now structured, but still empty and lifeless. That's when Enki stepped in, god of water, wisdom, and trickery. Not a fighter, more like an engineer/politician. Where Enlil wanted strict order, everybody in line, no excuses. Enki was the one finding loopholes, experimenting, bending the rules of nature, and sneaking in creativity. Their push and pull is the heartbeat of Sumerian cosmology. One was storm and discipline, the other water and secret knowledge. And watching from a cold, distant perch was An, the sky god, the detached relative who only shows up for weddings and funerals. For the Sumerians, creation was all about that tug-of-war between chaos and order, strictness and cunning. And if you think about it, it feels pretty familiar, doesn't it? One boss insists everything be done by the book. The other says, nah, we'll do it my way. And caught between them, that's us, the poor employees of this cosmic office, just trying to survive the shift. By now, we know that in Sumerian tradition, creation wasn't some instant snap of divine magic. It was more like a long construction project. First chaos, then piles of mud and water, and only later did things slowly start to look like order. But here's the twist. The Sumerians never thought humans were created in the image of the gods or out of divine love. Nope, their version was way more down to earth. The gods got tired of working and decided to outsource. And that's how humanity was born. Sound familiar? Like a modern factory where management decides we'll be the ones stuck on the night shift. So people got their job description: build temples, make sacrifices, sing hymns. Basically, handle all the repetitive tasks so the gods could kick back and relax. But as always happens when a workplace grows, so did the noise. The Sumerians even recorded a complaint from Enlil. The humans are so loud, I can't sleep. Imagine a god acting like your cranky upstairs neighbor, banging on the ceiling because you're watching Netflix too loud at 2 a.m. Only instead of filing a noise complaint, Enlil went straight for a global reset button, a flood. Yes, that flood. The story shows up in the Bible later, but the Sumerians had it first. Their Noah
was called Ziusudra. He was tipped off by Enki, god of water and wisdom, who basically whispered, "Buddy, build a boat, load it up with everything alive, and ride this one out." Ziusudra did exactly that, survived 7 days and nights of storm, and when the bird he released didn't return, he knew land was back. The ending is pure drama, and Lil was furious someone survived his final solution, but Enki defended humanity. In the end, the gods gave people another chance, and Ziusudra scored the ultimate perk, immortality. So, the flood story isn't just about survival. It's also the first recorded case of corporate negotiation between strict manager Enlil and clever advisor Enki.
Now, let's shift to the Pantheon itself. Picture a corporate org chart. Modern companies have a president, vice presidents, and a bunch of managers. The Sumerian gods? Pretty much the same thing.
At the very top was On, the lofty, distant sky god. He didn't meddle much in daily affairs. Think of him as the honorary chairman of the board. If something truly cosmic was on the line, like the fate of the world, then the other gods brought it up to him.
His son, Enlil, was the exact opposite. Less symbolic authority, more strict supervisor. He cared about order, about making sure the gods got their offerings, and that humans knew who was boss. Step out of line, and he brought down punishment fast. The flood was just the most famous of his management decisions. Humans, in the Sumerian worldview, were never the gods' beloved children, more like their maintenance crew. Needed, but also irritating. Even in the myths, it's clear. Humans were useful, but at the same time drove the gods crazy. Kind of like an air conditioner in summer. It saves your life, but the constant humming can drive you up the wall. That's why the Sumerian Pantheon reads not only as divine drama, but as very human drama too. Exhaustion, annoyance, cunning, power struggles. Add in love affairs and epic quarrels, and what you get is somewhere between deep cosmology and a supernatural soap opera. Now it's time to meet, hands down, the brightest star of the entire Sumerian divine squad, Inanna. Later, she'd be known as Ishtar, but trust me, the personality didn't change. She was a firecracker blend of passion, fertility, desire, power, and surprise, also war and destruction. In short, Inanna was like a divine Tinder goddess and a 4-star general rolled into one. People prayed to her for love, victory, or a good harvest, but everyone knew if you didn't please her, you might not get a kiss of fate, but a cosmic slap in the face. Her worship looked very different from the others. In Inanna's temples, there was music, dancing, full-on performances.
It wasn't stiff bureaucracy with boring rituals. It was emotion, energy, life. And the biggest annual festival? The sacred marriage ritual, where the king symbolically became her lover. If the goddess accepted the union, the land thrived, crops grew, and people basked happily under the sun. If he failed to impress, let's just say the harvest ghosted him, drought moved in, and everyone knew the date didn't go well. But Inanna's most famous story is her descent into the Underworld. Imagine the goddess of love, life, and desire decides to pay a visit to her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. Why? Some say she wanted to claim power even over the land of shadows. Others say she was mourning her fallen husband. Whatever the reason, what followed was pure epic drama. Before leaving, she did what any queen would. Got dressed to the nines. Crown, jewels, symbols of power, the whole look. The problem? At every gate of the Underworld, she had to give up one of her items. By the time she reached her sister, she was stripped of everything, standing completely naked and powerless. And that's when Ereshkigal showed who ran the place. She sentenced Inanna, hung her body on a hook, and instantly life on earth began to fade. For 3 days and 3 nights, the world froze. No flowers bloomed, no rivers flowed, no children were born. Imagine spring with no green leaves, no scent of blossoms. That's what the earth looked like without Inanna. It was only Enki's cleverness that saved her. He created 2 tiny spirits who slipped into the Underworld. They didn't beg for favors. They didn't argue. They simply listened to Ereshkigal's cries of pain. And for the first time, someone actually showed her empathy. Touched, the Queen of the Dead agreed to release Inanna, but only if someone took her place. When Inanna returned, she found her lover, Dumuzi, hadn't lifted a finger for her. No prayers, no rituals, nothing. His indifference sealed his fate. The Underworld's servants dragged him away. Only his sister, Inanna, volunteered to share the burden. Half the year Dumuzi remained below. Half the year he returned to Earth. And that, according to the Sumerians, is why the seasons change. Death and rebirth, the eternal rhythm of nature. The myth of Inanna isn't just a story of love and drama. It's more like an ancient thriller about power, sacrifice, and the inevitability of fate. And it's also a reminder, even a goddess who seems unstoppable can find herself powerless when faced with the laws of another world. Picture a Sumerian morning. In a clay brick city, the air still smells of last night's fires. Dogs bark lazily in the streets, and someone's already stoking an oven to brew beer instead of coffee. And then, the first rays of sunlight.
For the Sumerians, this wasn't just sunrise. It meant their top morality inspector was back on duty, the sun god Utu.
Utu wasn't just the sun warming your back while you're weeding the fields. He was the light of truth, order, and the all-seeing eye. Think of him as that strict old neighbor who's always peering off his balcony, spotting everything. Who pays taxes fair and square, and who's selling grain with a little extra dust mixed in. Whether you were an honest trader or a crooked one, a wise ruler or a tyrant, nobody escaped his watchful gaze.
The Sumerians believed Utu was the one who handed down fair judgments. He didn't shower blessings like Nanna, or roar with storms like Enlil. His power was about keeping honesty alive. Live with integrity, and he had your back. Cheat, and his light exposed the lie. That's why offerings were made to him at temples. Judges prayed for his guidance in court, and soldiers asked him to shine on their battles.
But Utu wasn't just a judge. He was also a traveler. Every morning he'd stride out through the gates of heaven, cross the sky, and by evening slip beneath the horizon to journey through the underworld. Down there, his role got even more interesting. He became a guide for souls. Imagine the sun as a lantern leading the dead through the darkness. And while at it, he fought off demons, protected people, and even armed heroes. According to legend, it was Utu who handed Gilgamesh the weapon strong enough to slay the monster Humbaba.
So Utu wasn't just a heavenly spotlight. He was a symbol of protection, strength, and unshakable order. Like the antivirus software of the ancient world, catching cheaters by day, battling shadows and evil spirits by night.
If Utu ran the daytime shift with his big spotlight of truth, then at night the handoff went to Nanna. For the Sumerians, he wasn't just a glowing circle in the sky. He was the night shift manager, god of magic, prophecy, and secrets. Think of it like this. In the day, you get fined for breaking the rules. At night, the same world turns into a place of mystery, dreams, and fate. That was Nanna's domain. His light didn't expose the truth outright the way Odysseus's beams did. Instead, it hinted, teased, played with the shadows. Like a dim park lamp, enough to see the path, but always leaving you wondering what might be lurking just beyond the bushes. No surprise, then, that the Sumerians tied him to fortune-telling, cycles of time, and the rhythms of life itself. Every month, he changed his face from a thin crescent to a full shining disk, and then back into nothingness. That was his cosmic show, light and dark, birth and disappearance.
Nanna himself was calm, even a little distant. He didn't meddle much in human affairs directly, but his priests, they were the true astronomers of the ancient world. They tracked lunar phases, calculated planting times, and etched prophecies onto clay tablets. In the city of his main cult center, they built massive temple observatories. You could call it the first future lab, where magic and math worked hand in hand.
According to myth, Nanna was the father of two of the heavyweights, Utu, the sun god, and Inanna, the fierce goddess of love and war. From him, they inherited not just divine lineage, but pieces of his essence. Utu got the clarity to see truth, while Inanna took on his Homer for passion and power. But here's the twist. Even though Nanna symbolized wisdom, his moonlight always carried a hidden side. That's why he was honored not only by kings and commoners, but also by magicians who brought him offerings to peel back the curtain of the future.
For the Sumerians, the moon wasn't just a romantic lantern glowing above a night city. It was the reminder that everything in the world has two sides. And sometimes the answers you seek can only be found in the shadows, never under the glare of the noonday sun.
All right, friends, time to go down, way down, to the place the Sumerians feared and respected more than anything, the Underworld, known as Kur. And no, this wasn't a spa retreat, not the Carpathians, not even a cheap all-inclusive tour to Turkey. Kur was the land of no return, no light, no joy, no hope. Imagine a forever dormitory where the food is dust and mud. There's zero entertainment, and the only reminder of your old life is whatever your relatives bring as offerings: a crust of bread, a drop of oil, a sip of water. If your family forgets you, that's it. You fade away completely. The rulers here were Nergal and Ereshkigal, king and queen of the dead. Ereshkigal embodied death itself, unyielding, cold like the stone throne she sat on, surrounded by her demon servants, the Galu. Not cruel, but never merciful. Her power was inevitability. No god, not even the strongest, could overturn her rule. According to myth, she'd once been trapped in Kur and became its eternal mistress. In other words, even gods couldn't escape destiny.
Nergal, on the other hand, was different. He started off as a god of war, plague, and destruction, moving between the world of the living and the dead like some cosmic troublemaker, spreading chaos on both sides. Then came the turning point. During a great banquet of the gods, Ereshkigal couldn't attend. You don't exactly get to leave the underworld unattended. Instead, she sent her servant, the demon Namtar. Every god stood in respect except Nergal. With that single snub, he insulted the Queen of Death herself. Nergal, on the other hand, was different. He started off as a god of war, plague, and destruction, moving between the world of the living and the dead like some cosmic troublemaker, spreading chaos on both sides. Then came the turning point. During a great banquet of the gods, Ereshkigal couldn't attend. You don't exactly get to leave the underworld unattended. Instead, she sent her servant, the demon Namtar. Every god stood in respect except Nergal. With that single snub, he insulted the Queen of Death herself.
For the Sumerians, it was a terrifying but logical story. Nobody escapes Kur, so people tried at least to soften the fate of their dead, offering bread, oil, water, holding remembrance rituals so the soul wouldn't starve in eternal darkness. Even carving spells on tombs to guard against being forgotten entirely. But the truth was harsh. In their worldview, all paths eventually led down there, into the land of shadows. No trick could change that.
And yet, even in that darkness, the Sumerians made room for a love story. Maybe as a reminder that love outlasts death. Maybe just as fate's irony, but even underground, there was a power couple, Nergal and Ereshkigal. And once they were bound together, nobody could take their throne away.
So, we've already met the noisy cast of Sumerian gods, each with their quirks, tempers, and scandals. But now it's time to step behind the curtain and meet the ones who rarely showed up center stage. Yet without them, the whole play wouldn't have even happened. The Anunnaki.
Think of them as a shadow government or a constitutional court. Nobody voted for them, but their rulings decided whether your city thrived or turned into rubble. They weren't the heroes of myths. They didn't bicker like Enlil and Enki, and they definitely didn't throw dramatic fits like Inanna. The Anunnaki were law itself, invisible, untouchable, but keeping everything in balance. In the oldest texts, they're described as descendants of An, the sky god. High status, sure, but never the starring role. They always acted collectively, like a board of directors meeting to decide who gets to be king and who gets the axe. A ruler could scream all day that he was chosen by the gods, but without the Anunnaki's stamp of approval, it was basically the same as flashing a diploma bought at a flea market. But here's the twist. In later myths, their role shifted. From heavenly judges, they morphed into grim arbiters of the underworld, sitting alongside Ereshkigal and deciding the fate of the dead. At first, they handed out destinies to kings and cities. Later, they handed out verdicts on souls. From controlling empires to controlling eternity. Talk about career advancement.
They never came down to teach humans skills like Enki did. And they didn't star in epic adventures. No, they worked through other gods. The Anunnaki were a system, cold, faceless, like an algorithm, unemotional, invisible, but deciding whether you get a blessing or a sentence. That's why the Sumerians gave them generous offerings: bread, wine, oil, livestock. Not to feed their whims, but to keep the system stable. They embodied order and inevitability, not the fire of passion like Inanna, not the storm of rage like Enlil. You couldn't sweet-talk them. You couldn't bribe them. They were fate, something you could only try to soften with rituals. And maybe that's why the Anunnaki are wrapped in so much mystery, faceless in the myths, but always looming in the background.
And here's where the intrigue begins. The Anunnaki became the most enigmatic element of Sumerian mythology, the one that later spawned everything from deep philosophical theories to modern conspiracy tales about ancient aliens. But we'll get to that part a little later.
And here we are, the juicy part. The moment when Sumerian clay tablets suddenly stop being dusty archaeological finds and turn into the script for a sci-fi blockbuster. Enter Zecharia Sitchin, an American writer who, in 1976, dropped a book with the very click-worthy title, The 12th Planet. Why 12th? Because Sitchin wasn't just counting planets. He threw in the sun and the moon, like a kid padding his homework answers to make the list look longer.
According to his theory, the Anunnaki weren't gods at all, but aliens from a mysterious planet called Nibiru. A planet that, like the world's most unreliable guest, only swings by the solar system once every 3,600 years on a wildly stretched out orbit. And why did they supposedly come to Earth? Not for sightseeing selfies at the pyramids, but for gold. Yep, gold. And not for jewelry either. Sitchin claimed the Anunnaki were like interplanetary climate engineers, sprinkling gold dust into their atmosphere to patch it up. Picture a cosmic version of Extreme Makeover, Planet Edition.
But here's the thing, digging isn't fun. So in his telling, they decided to do what today's corporations can only dream of in their secret labs: create the perfect workers. They grabbed some primate DNA, spliced in their own genes, and boom, humans. Not designed for spiritual enlightenment, but for punching the time clock in the mines. Sounds straight out of the X-Files or an episode of Ancient Aliens, right? There's just one tiny problem. The Sumerian texts don't actually say any of this. Not a single mention of Nibiru as some alien base. Not a single line about humans being engineered for mining shifts. It's all Sitchin's personal remix. Scholars went through his translations, scratching their heads. Where exactly is he seeing this? And the answer is nowhere. Still, the irony is rich. His books got so popular that for a lot of people today, the Anunnaki aren't ancient gods from clay tablets anymore. They're cosmic miners in shiny spacesuits. As if the Sumerians weren't writing hymns, but secretly filing NASA reports. After all those stories about the Anunnaki as cosmic gold miners, it's probably a good time to cool off and look at what the Sumerians themselves actually meant. Because, let's be honest, imagining Nibiru as some interplanetary bulldozer scooping up gold dust is fun. But it's about as connected to real Sumerian astronomy as flat Earth memes are to actual physics. So, what was Nibiru really? The word does show up in Sumerian texts, but here's the twist. It doesn't mean secret planet hiding beyond Pluto. Nibiru is usually translated as crossing point, place of transition, or sometimes as the name of a bright star. In some texts, it's identified with Jupiter. In others, it's a spot in the sky where certain stars rise. For the Sumerians, Nibiru wasn't a doomsday planet swinging through the solar system every 3,600 years. It was an astronomical marker. And this is important. The Sumerians weren't conspiracy theorists. They were careful record keepers. Think of them as the office workers of the sky. They tracked days, charted the movements of heavenly bodies, and made sure everyone knew when to plant barley or prep for the floods. Picture Excel spreadsheets carved into clay tablets, only with stars in the moon instead of formulas. Now for the science. Modern astrophysicists are clear. A planet with the orbit Sitchin described simply couldn't exist. Its gravity would have already tossed the solar system into chaos, ejecting Earth like an unwanted passenger from a crowded bus. And most importantly, not a single Sumerian text mentions aliens, spaceships, or intergalactic gold mining labs. Those are modern add-ons, entertaining, sure, but pure fiction. So why do these ideas stick so hard? Simple. People love drama. Saying Nibiru is just an ancient term for Jupiter doesn't exactly spark the imagination. But picture a colossal rogue planet barreling through the heavens, destined to one day set things straight. Now that's binge-worthy. It's mythology meets prime-time TV. The more intrigue, the higher the ratings. And here we are, the part where the Sumerians suddenly find themselves hanging out with little green men in shiny flying saucers. Because ancient aliens theories are exactly that case, where a casual "but what if" snowballs into a global franchise. People look at pyramids, ziggurats, or massive stone monuments and ask, come on, could regular folks with shovels and pickaxes really pull this off? There had to be some cosmic foreman supervising the job. The truth is much more down to earth. The Sumerians built their own temples, canals, and cities. Not aliens, not galactic architects, just brains, teamwork, and centuries of trial and error. But let's be real. That version sounds way less exciting than the image of Anunnaki in spacesuits swinging golden pickaxes. Sumerian mythology itself left no mystery about human purpose. The gods made people to work, period. No, in the image of the divine. No promise of heavenly retirement. More like an eternal contract with no vacation days. According to the myths, the younger gods used to dig canals, haul water, and blister their divine hands with manual labor. Eventually, they got sick of it and outsourced, not to an HR department, but to the goddess Ninmah, who mixed clay with divine blood and molded the first humans. Basically, the world's earliest labor startup. And like most startups, the first prototypes weren't great. Some humans were too weak, some too sickly, others just weird. But Ninmah kept iterating until she landed on a working model. Not a poet, not an artist, not a philosopher. The job description was simple: dig, plow, build, feed the gods, and keep quiet about it. Even death didn't come with perks. No heavenly resorts, no eternal paradise, just the gloomy underworld, Kur, where souls dined on dust and hoped the living would at least remember to send them a snack offering. In the Sumerian worldview, humans weren't heroes, they were resources. The sacrifices, rituals, and temples weren't for divine entertainment. They were upkeep, maintenance fees. And no, the gods didn't literally eat the meat off the altar. What they wanted was the aroma. In fact, you could say the Sumerians invented the world's first fragrance delivery service. A puff of incense, the smell of roasted meat, and the gods were satisfied. So what picture do we end up with? A world where humans weren't the chosen children of heaven, but workers on a divine plantation. Efficient, practical, and utterly unromantic.
Ready for humanity's very first blockbuster? Because the Epic of Gilgamesh really is the original binge-worthy series, packed with heroes, battles, curses, love drama, death, the search for life's meaning, and yes, even a magical plant stolen by a snake. If Netflix ever runs out of ideas, this 4,000-year-old script is just sitting there, ready to go.
Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, so powerful that the city walls were considered unbeatable. But like power often does, it went straight to his head. Let's be honest, he wasn't just a little harsh, he was a full-blown tyrant, grabbing whatever and whoever he wanted without asking. His people begged the gods for relief, and the gods thought, fine, let's give him a rival. So they created Enkidu, a wild man from the steppe who hung out with animals and lived on grass. Basically, the Sumerian Tarzan.
But then came the upgrade. A woman introduces him to wine, bread, and love, the holy trinity of civilization. The animals reject him,
but he gains entry into the human world. He marches off to Uruk, meets Gilgamesh, and instead of a never-ending fight scene, the battle ends with something unexpected. They become brothers, from sworn enemies to best friends in one episode flat. Together they go adventuring. They cut down the giant Humbaba in the cedar forest, and they kill the bull of heaven, sent by an angry Ishtar. Yep, the goddess of love herself, who had proposed marriage to Gilgamesh only to get a firm thanks but no thanks. That's when the real tragedy kicks in. The gods decree that one of them must die. And it's Enkidu.
Enkidu's death shatters Gilgamesh. For the first time, he realizes that strength, fame, and brotherhood can't hold back mortality. So he sets off on a quest for the one thing he thinks can: immortality. His journey is basically the world's first RPG. Dark lands, a wise tavern-keeper goddess, Siduri, a perilous crossing over the waters of death, and a meeting with Utnapishtim, the man who survived the great flood and was granted eternal life. But even then, Gilgamesh fails. He falls asleep during his test, literally failing at Don't Fall Asleep 101. And when he finally finds the plant of eternal life, a snake swipes it. Talk about the worst plot twist. The hero comes home empty-handed. But here's where it gets deep. He realizes immortality isn't about living forever. It's about leaving something that lasts. A wall, a temple, a city, a memory. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk a changed man, wiser, more human, more aware of his limits. And his story, pressed into clay tablets in cuneiform, outlived not only him, but his entire civilization. It influenced Babylon, the Bible, even Greek mythology. And today, that same theme, a hero chasing eternity but finding meaning in mortality, still shows up in novels, films, and even video games. Here's a fun thought. Ever heard of content repackaging? Bloggers do it all the time today. They grab an old meme, slap on some new filters, and boom, it's viral again. In the ancient world, that job belonged to Babylon. They looked at the Sumerian legacy and thought, wow, that mythology is awesome. Shame to let it go to waste. Let's rebrand it. And just like that, old gods got new names and fresh job titles in the Pantheon. Enlil became Bel, Anu stayed Anu, guess they didn't bother with that one, and Inanna got a full stage makeover as Ishtar, goddess of love and war. In Babylon, she was even more of a superstar. Think of it like a small-town band suddenly blown up by a big city producer. Same songs, but now the stage lights are brighter, the costumes shinier, and the ticket prices way higher. Babylon itself rose from the ruins of Sumerian cities and grew into the new megacity of the ancient Near East. Its ziggurats climbed so high into the sky that you'd imagine even the gods glancing down out of boredom, muttering, "Ah, these people are stacking bricks again. Still no elevators." And it was there that the old Sumerian stories got rewritten into new editions. What were once local legends became sweeping national epics. In Babylonian culture, the Sumerian experience got a full upgrade. Cuneiform tablets weren't just random records anymore. They became vast libraries, like the legendary collection of Ashur-nibanipal. In these texts, the gods no longer felt like cranky neighbors ruining family gatherings. Instead, they were portrayed as majestic rulers of the cosmos, their feuds and intrigues framed as nothing less than the laws of the universe itself. But for all the grandeur, that Sumerian flavor never really disappeared. Babylonian gods could still be annoyed by human noise, still flood the earth in a fit of rage, still fall into messy love affairs. The difference was scale and drama. If the Sumerians wrote the first family drama with fantasy elements, Babylon turned it into a cosmic blockbuster with a budget funded by the entire tax system of the ancient world. And that leads us neatly to the next story, the Babylonian bestseller that didn't just entertain, but explained the very origins of the cosmos. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's myth, where instead of a quiet family dinner of the gods, we'll witness battles of full cosmic proportions. So, picture this. The Sumerians had already written their script for how the world began. Pretty straightforward. There was chaos. Out of it came the forces of nature. The gods did some building, had some arguments, and voila, the world appeared. Logical enough. But then the Babylonians took that draft and thought, nope, nobody's watching that. Needs more action, more special effects, more drama. And just like that, Enuma Elish was born, the true cosmic blockbuster of the ancient world. At the heart of the story is an epic battle. Primordial monsters embody chaos, and the gods face them in a fight for existence. This isn't a quiet world emerging from the waters of creation anymore. It's a full-on war of the heavens. Tiamat, goddess of the ocean, transforms into a monstrous dragon-like beast, threatening all of creation. Her roar is like a car alarm going off in the middle of the night because the wind shook some rusty old sedan. And then enters the hero, Marduk, the up-and-coming god of order. He's armed with legendary gear, a net for chaos, a massive bow and arrows, plus a few magic spells for good measure. The showdown plays out like the trailer to a fantasy epic. Tiamat opens her jaws to swallow Marduk, but he fires an arrow straight down her throat. She collapses, and then comes the defining move. He splits her body in two. One half becomes the sky, the other the earth. The world literally crafted out of the remains of chaos. Brutal? Sure. But for the Babylonians, it was the perfect message. Order only comes through struggle and sacrifice. From Enuma Elish, comes the idea that the cosmos isn't a gift, it's a victory. Creation is proof of conquest, and ruling power belongs to whoever defeats chaos. No wonder the Babylonians read this epic every new year. Imagine ringing in the holiday not with champagne, but with a marathon recitation about gods slicing dragons in half. Instant party vibes. But here's the real kicker. This wasn't just mythology, it was politics. Marduk isn't just a hero, he's the god whose triumph justifies Babylon's dominance. It's basically propaganda in verse. Our god beat chaos, so our city is in charge. End of story. And from that point on, it's clear. Myths weren't just bedtime tales. They were ideology. The glue that held empires together. Which sets us up perfectly for the next story. One less about cosmic brawls and more about wisdom and cunning. Because that's where the myth of Adapa begins. Imagine being the very first man on Earth, basically humanity beta version. On the plus side, you've got no taxes, no traffic jams, no HOA fees. On the downside, you're kind of a lab experiment for the gods, who still haven't decided exactly how this whole human program is supposed to run. That's Adapa, created by the god Enki, wise but mortal. Enki molded him out of clay like bread dough, but instead of yeast, he added a drop of divine blood. Not bad, right? Adapa could think, speak, even fish. Pretty impressive skill set. But there was a catch. Immortality wasn't included in the starter pack. Enki left him mortal on purpose, probably because even the gods knew eternal life plus human stubbornness is a recipe for disaster. And then comes the twist. Adapa ends up in the heavens before An, the supreme god. There he's offered the ultimate combo meal, bread and water of eternal life. Imagine it, immortality served on a platter free of charge. But Enki, the same god who created him, had already warned, don't eat, don't drink, it's a trap. So Adapa politely declines. One gracious, thanks, I'm not hungry. Later, humanity loses its one chance at immortality. The irony is almost comical. In the Bible, Adam and Eve do the opposite. They break the rule, eat from the tree of knowledge, and end up mortal as punishment. In the Sumerian version, Adapa is the model student, obedient to the end, and still ends up mortal. Moral of the story? Whether you rebel or obey, the result's the same. Humans don't get eternal life. Period. That's about as Sumerian as it gets. Gods could give people intelligence, but eternal life was off the table. Someone had to keep digging canals, herding flocks, and building temples while the divine elite enjoyed their eternity. Wisdom, yes. Immortality, no. But the story hits on something profound. Even 4,000 years ago, people were asking the same question we do today. Why should I have to die if I can think, create, feel? And the answer answers with a shrug and a touch of sarcasm. Because you're human, that's the deal. And from Adapa onward, one thing is clear. Mortality was always the sore spot, so much so that other civilizations tackled it too. Our next hero tried to defy fate and hand humanity a piece of the divine itself, a story of fire, rebellion, and punishment. Yes, it's time to meet Prometheus. Here's where things get interesting. Greece and Sumer might seem like two different planets, but myths traveled like old memes, changing names and costumes, but keeping the same punchline. If the Sumerians had Enki, the god who liked to bend the rules, slip humans a few survival tips, and basically hack the divine system, then the Greeks had Prometheus. Same archetype, new branding. The guy who thought, "Why are humans shivering in caves? Let's give them some fire already." Picture the scene. Mount Olympus as a corporate summit. Gods lounging on cloud thrones, Zeus sitting at the head of the table like the stern CEO. And then Prometheus pipes up. "So, quick update. I'm rolling out a new feature for humanity. It's called fire. They can now cook food, forge tools, and, occasionally burn down the landscape." And without waiting for approval, he just takes it. Zeus naturally was not amused. The punishment? Brutal. Prometheus was chained to a rock, and every day an eagle swooped in to snack on his liver. Imagine that routine. Every single day, same agony, no relief, knowing tomorrow the eagle's back for round 2. Yet Prometheus endured, silent, because he knew he'd secured humanity's most important right, the right to be a little smarter than the gods wanted. And here's where the parallel with Sumer gets striking. Enki also broke divine corporate policy, warning humans about the flood, slipping them wisdom, and constantly challenging the celestial management team. Whether in Sumer or Greece, the theme is the same. True power isn't immortality or divine status, it's knowledge. Knowledge you can pass on. And right next to Prometheus in the Greek tradition stands another familiar archetype, the hero who braves trials, slays monsters, and becomes the symbol of human endurance, Heracles. And here's the twist. His shadow looks an awful lot like another hero we've already met in Sumerian legend. Now, let's leave behind the mud brick ziggurats of Sumer and sail over to the rocky shores of Greece, a land of olives, wine, and endless tales about one stubborn man who just couldn't get home. His name? Odysseus. You'd think it'd be simple. Cross a few seas and you're back in Ithaca. A modern tourist with a cheap cruise package could have managed it faster. But no, in myth, nothing's ever that easy. Odysseus was basically Gilgamesh at sea, where the Mesopotamian king searched for immortality at the edge of the world. The Greek wanderer searched for Ithaca, his homeland, but fate threw every obstacle at him. Sirens, cyclopses, bewitching goddesses, and most importantly, he too descended into the underworld to speak with the shades of the dead. Sound familiar? Just like Gilgamesh, he had to face the darkness to wrestle with the question that haunts every human: how do we escape death? And here's the eerie part. Greek Tartarus looked an awful lot like the Sumerian Kur. No paradise gardens, no shining heavens, but just a gray realm of shadows where souls lived on dust, sustained only by the rare offerings of the living. Swap out the names, and you get the same chill. Death as not some glorious continuation, but as an eternal shadow. But here's what's fascinating. Both the Sumerians and the Greeks always slipped in heroes willing to step across the line. If you're going into the darkness, you don't go empty-handed. Odysseus brought back knowledge from the underworld. Gilgamesh brought back the bitter truth of mortality. In both cases, the real point wasn't what lay in the shadows. It was the fact that a human could go there, face it, and return. And once again, we're back to the same thread running through all of this. Civilizations vanish, gods change names, but the questions remain. Why are we mortal? How do we leave something behind that lasts? And now, friends, it's time to head toward the finale, to pause, sum it all up, and pull together everything we've traveled through, from cuneiform tablets to Odysseus. Because the big question is, why do these legends still matter today?
So, friends, we've taken quite a trip, from Sumerian clay tablets to Odysseus's wanderings, and even to modern conspiracy theories about Nibiru. What do we actually take away from all these myths, stories, and legends? First, and maybe the biggest lesson, the Sumerians knew perfectly well that humans are mortal, but they also realized something huge. Words, stories, and myths outlast their creators. It's like today. Your phone might die, your Wi-Fi might cut out, but the file saved in the cloud will stick around longer than you'll remember your email password. Second takeaway, humans have always tried to make sense of the chaos around them. Some imagined Anunnaki, others spun tales of Ishtar with her soap opera dramas, others sent heroes chasing immortality. And today, we spin sci-fi blockbusters. The set design changes, but the questions, why are we here? And is there life after paying the bills? Stay the same. Third point, the Sumerians built the template. Their myths fed into the Bible, Greek epics, and even today's conspiracy theories. Every generation slaps its own filter on the same old stories, from clay tablets to YouTube documentaries. And that's their real legacy. Not just the myths themselves, but the very idea of retelling, reshaping, and keeping them alive. And finally, the core truth. The Sumerians reminded us that immortality isn't in the body, or in gold mines, or in chasing a mysterious planet. It's in what you leave behind. A city, a wall, a song, or even just a meme. Because if people remember you, you're not completely gone. And now, let's pause before the final word, because after Sumer, the real question is, what does all of this mean for us today? Well, friends, we've reached the end of this long journey, from the first cuneiform scratches in clay to cosmic fantasies about Nibiru. From a goddess who could make kings fall in love to rulers of the underworld, from Gilgamesh to Odysseus. And honestly, the Sumerians feel a bit like those old friends you haven't seen in years, but whose presence you keep stumbling across in the Bible, in Greek myths, even in modern conspiracy theories on YouTube. Thank you for traveling this path with me. I hope you caught the scent of clay and sacrificial smoke, heard the echoes of ancient temples, and brushed against the same magic that's carried humanity for thousands of years. The world of the Sumerians is still an unfinished book. Every time we open it, there's always another page waiting to be discovered. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll come back ready to uncover another secret that's been hiding for millennia. But for now, guard your own stories well. Because if the Sumerians taught us anything, it's that stories are the closest thing we have to immortality. Until next time, friends.